This episode is in partnership with Authority Magazine. Authority Magazine, a Medium publication, is devoted to sharing in-depth and interesting interviews featuring people who are authorities in business, pop culture, wellness, social impact, and tech.
Well, we've all heard of Gen X and Gen Z and millennials. What about GenWell?
It's an organization designed to improve the well-being of all people, which in turn leads to purpose, self-esteem, empowerment, and better health.
Its founder is Pete Bombaci, who's dedicated his life to happiness. Pete, welcome to Believe in People.
Great to be here, Amy. Very excited for this conversation with yourself and Kevin.
Thank you. Well, Pete, Kevin wrote for our intro, which you'll hear after we produce this episode, but only as Kevin can. He said, we've all heard of Gen X and Gen Z and millennials, but what about GenWell? So I'm going to ask you, what motivated you to create GenWell?
Yeah, well, GenWell, which is Canada's Human Connection Movement, is a movement was inspired by the summer blackout of 2003 here in Toronto and on the eastern seaboard of North America. That evening, when everybody had all the power turned off and we lost the ability to use our technology, phones, TVs, radios, everything around us, we got connected. And I went to a friend's house, and at 9 o'clock at night, I walked out on their front porch, and they were on a side street, and the street was packed with people. And what I just made the assumption that everybody on that street, I lived on a major thoroughfare at the time, I assumed they all knew each other. So I walked out onto the street and I said, this is incredible. You guys all know each other. I wish I lived on a street like this. And they looked at me and said, we don't know each other. And it was right there that I thought to myself, wow, it takes a crisis for us to even talk to the people who we live beside, work beside, play beside. And that was the inspiration behind building a movement that said, we got to stop waiting until we're in crisis before we think about talking to the people that are right beside us each and every day.
Well, interestingly enough, we've come out, a total power outage, that is a great sort of, metaphor for for how we communicate with each other these days. We've just come out of COVID, which still keeps hanging around. So that's sort of isolated us even further, did it not? And we're afraid of other people.
Yeah, it's a great comment, Kevin. You know, the research, Robert Putnam, Bowling Alone, shows that we've been increasingly disconnected since the 60s. And so whether it was bowling individually versus with teams, whether it was Lions clubs or churches, all the ways in which we used to connect, we've been increasingly disconnected from those organizations. The pandemic comes along, and all of a sudden we start to feel it for real because it's tangible now. We don't go to the office. There's one study out of the US that shows up to 76% of people in workplaces didn't feel like it was easy for them to build relationships. And that was when we were in the office together. And so the reality is putting people into a room doesn't facilitate connection in a world where we don't feel like we have permission to talk to each other, whether it's because people are busy or because we're distracted with phones. So we need to give people the information that says, hey, whether it's talking to a stranger, those who talk to strangers, our research shows, are up to 3 times happier than those that don't talk to a stranger. Those who know your neighbor are up to 3 times less lonely. And we've got a loneliness crisis in the world. We forgot that these connections are available to us and they're all around us. But we've created this fast-paced, distracted world where sometimes we don't even think about the opportunity to connect with somebody that's standing right beside us.
So then so Pete, here's the conundrum here. So we want this so very badly. We've been so isolated, but I'm finding that since this pandemic and coming out of it, I honestly can walk down the street. I've actually kind of tested this, to be honest. Walk down the street, I look people in the eye and I smile. And I would say in most cases, I do not get a return smile.
Yeah, Amy.
And it's heartbreaking for me.
Yeah, it is for me as well. I'm an extrovert at heart, and I want to see people smile. And so this is really what the movement's all about. Is there's 2 sides to this. Number one is giving people permission to do it. You know, because when you walk down the street and you do that, what I want you to know is that the efforts that you're making to build connection with people, Amy, is really important to the health and well-being of you and to the people that you connect with. We've told people for 50 years not to talk to strangers. So is it any surprise that most people walk around not talking to strangers? What we need to do is inform people with the information and the facts around talking to strangers. Nick Epley out of Chicago Booth has done research that shows it's up to almost 100% of the time when we talk to strangers that both parties are happy it happened. So when we come across somebody who doesn't respond, don't let that deter you from continuing your action. Because in time, we will create a society that thinks more positively about those interactions and recognizes that these are positive things for us to do. But secondly, and I don't know if Jonathan Haidt just came out with a book, The Anxious Generation. That book is, to me, one of the most powerful books I've read on this topic. And it's about giving people permission at the same time. And so we run 7 campaigns throughout the year. One's called Talk to a Stranger Week. One is called Face to Face February, Loneliness Awareness Week, GenWell Weekends, which are all catalytic occasions because, as Jonathan points out in his book, when we have our phones, if you're in a community or in a house or in a classroom and only one person puts down the phone, it really makes it difficult for that one person to do what we're trying to do, which is create social connection. We need to do this as a community, as a classroom, as a home. It's why in homes we see putting the phone down at dinner. At a classroom, maybe it's banning phones from the classroom so that no one individual is trying to lead this and is kind of up against this brick wall of other people around them that aren't in tune with that message. So it really is a societal approach to solving the disconnected world because we can't do it alone.
Um, I was going to quote, I mean, one of the John Prine songs that touched me so deeply was Hello in There, with regards to saying hello to an old person when you pass them on the street. Hello in there, hello in there. Um, do we have a loneliness problem we're so connected, and yet we have a loneliness problem?
I think we've got 2 problems. Is first off, we've never educated people on the importance of social connection. We've talked about exercise and eating well and sleep and water and don't drink too much and don't smoke. But we've never articulated social connection through this, which is, we've hidden it under sports teams and book clubs and wine clubs. I always joke, you go to the book club and you read the book or talk about the book for 30 minutes, and then you hang out for 2 hours and talk to each other about everything else. It's like, did I actually go for the book or did I actually go for the human connection? And so I think we need to flip the conversation around and say, hey, we need to actually put this on the forefront and say, you need human connection. We all need human connection. We're social species. We call the worst punishment we can give somebody solitary confinement. And for 2 years there, and it was far worse up here in Canada, we locked people down and told them they shouldn't connect at a time when in crisis, we need each other more than ever before.
That's so true. And so, Pete, with your organization, GenWell, you mentioned that you have events throughout the year, but could you walk us through, like, how do you connect with people? How do you create that social health? Can you sort of elaborate on that?
Really, the starting point. So we do education programs in workplaces, classrooms, communities, and seniors organizations. But as we know, the solution, and the second part I was going to make even on the seniors piece, is that the solution isn't telling the people that are in crisis of loneliness, whether it's chronic or persistent, hey, senior, you should buck up and get more social. It's actually educating everybody else that's around the senior to say, hey, did you realize that if you reached out and talked to the neighbor who's a senior or your grandmother or somebody else, that we are all part of the solution? So we educate people from the bottom up. So we go into those different organizations and we say, let me educate your 50 or your 100 or your 1,000 employees that not only are the relationships that we have within the workplace valuable to our health and well-being, but when you go home, think about your strangers, think about your neighbors, think about your family, so that we bring that conscious level up. And then the campaigns are really population level opportunities for us to all do it at the same time. The analogy I use, which I think is really powerful, is look, there's a thing called Halloween. And that one day a year, we all wear costumes. Well, where did this come from? How did all of a sudden we all align that one crazy day of the year we'd all wear costumes? It's because somebody sold us in and gave us permission to wear your silly Ted Lasso hat and dress up as a cowboy or Ted Lasso or ballerina, whatever you want to dress up. And we need to do the same thing right now to help people build connection. We need to say this weekend is about talking to strangers, or this week is about talking to a senior, or this week is about putting your phone down and being more conscious and intentional about the barrier that the phones are creating in our lives, but most importantly, about reaching out and building connections that make us all happier and healthier.
You mentioned health and well-being a minute ago. You know, much of the world is in a healthcare crisis with regards to cost, with regards to accessibility, all these sorts of things. Are you suggesting that your health and well-being can improve when you are more active in an open society, and therefore you are healthier, therefore you don't get sick, therefore you don't become a burden on the healthcare system?
Absolutely. Up here
Really?
in Canada, Kevin, as a Canadian, a transplanted Canadian, the healthcare system up here spends $350 billion a year on Canadian healthcare. We spend next to nothing on prevention. And, we've had prevention programs in the past, but now we have this issue called social isolation, disconnection, and loneliness, which we know is correlated to heart disease, dementia, diabetes, suicide, addiction, obesity, cancer. So pretty much everything, because when we feel chronically or persistently lonely, it creates inflammation in the body from stress, from anxiety. So if we know that if we can prevent those illnesses by just helping people get connected, wouldn't it make sense that we'd invest some time in educating people about the power of human connection? You know, the Robert Waldinger study out of Harvard that says it's the greatest contributor to happiness in our lives. It reduces anxiety and depression, increases empathy, compassion, resilience, strengthens your immune system, strengthens your self-confidence. And a study during the pandemic said it's the greatest preventative action to avoid depression. But we've never told anybody this information. And that's really the mission of GenWell, is to say, hey, let's give people the information so we can empower them to say, before you need a program, before you go to the doctor or to the emergency room, why
Or the
don't we
beer
empower
store?
you? Yeah, exactly. Why don't we empower you to just start building this into your daily practice, just like we've thought about going for a walk or a run or getting fruit and vegetables at the grocery store?
Yeah. Pete, I'm curious. Tell me, what were you like as a kid and what were your parents like? What were you like growing up?
I think I was here. I'll say I was an overweight, chubby, playful, funny kid, and I'm almost the same thing. I'm still a little overweight. I still like to play. I played ball hockey almost every day. Ball hockey, kick the can, hide and seek, tag. I would play anything if the group was getting together. Count me in. But I lost my dad at 13,
Oh.
and I really, to be honest with you, and some people have called this out in me, like what drives me to lead this movement for connection is that I know what it was like to feel alone. Felt like I was the only person who didn't have a dad. And at times, it felt like, you were facing challenges that nobody else could understand. And so, lots of things in my life have led to me having although lots of things have led me to recognize today that I've been lonely throughout the course of my life, because loneliness is not an illness. Loneliness is actually your body and your brain telling you need social connection. And that's another lens we need to shift. We talk about the loneliness crisis. Loneliness is not a crisis. Loneliness is a beautiful thing if we embrace it and we understand what to do with it. If we create a society in which reaching out to other people is a normal thing, like you say, Amy, when we walk down the street, if every person we walked by and spoke to smiled back at us and said, "Hey, have a great day." Well, that would change, because those interactions by research show that it makes you happier and the other person happier. So we just need to help people get there. And I think by information and giving them permission with different occasions throughout the year, we can achieve that over a period of time.
So how do we raise the next generation then after Gen X, Gen Z, millennials, and GenWell, which is what we're working towards, I guess.
Hmm.
Um, you mentioned the games that you played as a kid, and I find that very interesting. We played road hockey. We played kick the can because my dad used to play kick the can and he taught it to us. We played hide and seek. We played Red Rover, come over. All of those games are social games. All of those games you played with your friends. Now you have to book a month in advance to get a kid to have a play date alone in a room with another kid somewhere isolated because you don't want to let your kid go outside. Obviously, there are reasons people worry about that, but it's still, have we gone way overboard the other way? And how do we teach the next generation to actually know how to look somebody in the eye and say hello, good morning?
Yeah, isn't that the question of the day? Well, I think Jonathan Haidt has done it well in The Anxious Generation. Look, at the end of the day, we need to educate everybody. And so we have school programming, we're going in, and it's the challenge is we need to do it all together. So our education programming that we're working on right now is not just about educating the kids because, their frontal lobes aren't developed. They don't always make the best decisions because they haven't got the wisdom or the experience. So we need to educate the student, the teacher, the administrator, and the parents all at the same time to say, hey, we need to be part of the solution because we are the parents. We're not our friends of our kids. We sometimes need to make the decisions that they don't like. And unfortunately, because of the addictive tendencies of technology, some of the kids are not going to respond very well initially to the idea of no technology. You're not taking your phone to school because that phone distracts you from the relationships and the opportunities. The Anxious Generation book said the average young girl today is 20 hours a week on social media. That's beyond any technology for school. Well, that's 20 hours, Kevin, that you and I were playing. And what happens when we play is when we get in a fight because you want to play kick the can and I want to play hide and seek, is we figure it out. We go, well, hey, Kevin, how about today we'll play kick the can, and would it be okay if like in 2 hours we started playing hide and seek later? And so we've lost that ability to negotiate and get along and work together and collaborate. And now we can't even get out the door because if I send my kid out the door right now because of the technology challenges, and this is where we all needed to do it together, is he goes out for 10 minutes and he goes, well, there's nobody else out there, Dad. What do you want me to do? And then I say, well, I guess I'll come out and play with you. And so, again, I hate to say this too, is that it comes back to the parents again. It's like if we don't build the connections with the people on our streets and in our communities so that our kids can connect with those kids, those opportunities to build connection aren't going to happen because I can't expect my 9-year-old to go door to door up my street and just introduce himself to everybody. It's a wonderful thought, but I don't think anybody expects that of a young person. So again, the line I'll continue to use is we're in this one together, people. So we all need to start talking to each other and building these connections so everyone can thrive.
So Pete, what then, from a practical standpoint, what can we do now? Like what are maybe 3 things we could do or think about that would help this?
Well, I think you're on to one already, Amy, is I think everyone should start talking to strangers, to the people that and I'm not talking about a dark alley 2 o'clock in the morning after a bunch of drinks. I'm talking about the people that are in the grocery store. I'm talking about the people that are living 10 doors up the street from you instead of the ones that are right beside you. Each one of those conversations is an opportunity to learn, to grow, to smile, to recognize that we're not in this world alone and that the people around us actually might even teach us something, or we might learn about a different culture. I think the opportunity to share this information with the people we talk to so we normalize the information around social connection, i.e., hey, you remember how we talked about physical activity and eating well? Social health is a part of our overall well-being, and it, by research now, may be more important than the other things, especially post-pandemic. So there's a couple of things that I do, and I also think that volunteering and giving back is a great way, not just we've always put volunteering through the lens of, oh, I'm helping other people. That makes me feel good. But the ability to work with other people that are in that mindset of helping others is a great way to build connection with like-minded, empathetic, and compassionate human beings. Because again, even in the volunteering world, we're in this together. None of us want to live in a world where 10% of the population has all the money and the rest have nothing, because at the end of the day, that's not going to be a place where we live in peace anyway. So let's figure out how we can all work together and support those that are less fortunate, not only because it helps them feel better, but it helps us feel connected to the community as well.
Hmm. It's funny. I was just thinking of the phrase I gave at the office, which is a famous phrase, but it's kind of like, well, did you care at the office? Do you have any empathy at I mean, what, I don't even know what that means. But before we go, I just want to, you've got the believe hat on.
Yes, sir.
I think a lot of people found Ted Lasso to be a very naive kind of guy, a bumbling guy, and he was an American in the UK and all this kind of stuff. Did is there something deeper in Ted Lasso that has touched you, and perhaps you could share that with us?
Hmm. Well, I can tell you, I think the messages that were in Ted Lasso are something that every human being on this planet needs to take to heart, because as far as I was concerned, it was about being human, and it was about interacting with each other as human beings, not as a title, not as how much wealth you have or how little wealth you have, but recognizing that we are all human beings and we all bring value and we're all seen and heard. And that if we could all teach people to have that, I forget the words you used there, Kevin, just in describing him, but just that playful, uh,
Sort of optimistic
yeah, like,
naivety, you know.
Well, I mean,
yeah,
tell me
because
about the word, the believe.
yeah, it really is comes back to believe. Like it is to me, I guess if you go one step below believe, it's hope.
Hmm.
Yeah.
In a time like this when we many of us are struggling, whether it's food on the table or keeping a roof over our heads, or even trying to keep up with the pace and pressures that society puts on us today. I think we all have to have hope that it can be better, and hope, believe, however you want to frame it. The reality is, when we spend time with other people, the research shows it helps us cope, it helps us find solutions, and it helps us build resilience. And the resilience comes in knowing, hey, Amy, can I call you if I'm ever struggling? Kevin, would you mind having a coffee with me? Because I'm going through some challenging times. When we feel alone and we feel isolated and we don't have those people that we can lean on, life sucks. And so, if we can help people build these healthy connection habits and inspire them to believe and inspire them to hope, then I think that's how we create the starting point for a better world where everybody, has an opportunity to thrive.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think this is a fitting time, Pete, to we know that you believe in people. Why should others believe in people?
Well, hey, when we were born, none of us have any evil, none of us have anything other than a clean slate. And so, we all go through things in our life, change the way we may think, act, or feel, but we can all be brought back through human connection by spending time with other people and recognizing that we're all, human. We all want to live in peace. We all want to be happy and lead a fulfilling life. And frankly, if we share more, give more, and work together more often and spend time talking to one another, I believe we can create a world where everybody has an opportunity to do just that.
Pete
Thank you.
Bombaci of GenWell, thank you so much for spending some time with us, and thanks for believing in people.
Thank you. And thank you for sharing the message that you guys share with each one of your podcasts, because I think we need it more than ever before.
Thanks so much, Pete. Really appreciate it.
Yeah.
Well, Kev, there's something to be said. We talked about Ted Lasso, and for those who were listening to this podcast rather than viewing it, Pete had a cap that had believe, like the believe in Ted Lasso, the TV series. And there is something sweet and wonderful about being rather naive and optimistic and curious, because I think that it makes you a happier, warmer, more friendly, outgoing person. I think that that's maybe the secret to be more outgoing and maybe take a chance on, meeting your community a little bit more.
Yeah, I think it means you might be a little bit more real. And
Yeah.
I'm going to see what reactions I get today when I go to the grocery store and start saying good afternoon to people. And who knows, maybe I'll get a couple of smiles back, or maybe I'll get arrested, one or the other. If you don't want to get arrested, subscribe to Believe in People, and we'll see you again next week. Thank you very much.
Thanks, everyone.